Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itamar's Friday, Parashat Korach. And every time this week's portion comes up, we all know what the fear is, that people are worried about there's going to be some kind of argument in the congregation, in the synagogue, or anywhere, in our surroundings, in our, as we say, chevra, in our, in our circles. So that's the fear, because this week's portion, as we all know, what was a very, very terrible argument. It was a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu and against Aaron, against the priesthood. And we're all familiar with this week's portion, the central theme of the portion. But we have to, of course, come to try to understand, because division and argument, are they always a problem? And that's the question that we have to pose, because we know here this week the government of Israel collapsed. It all has to do with politics. It's all about division and argument all the time and debating. And I'd like to first open up with the words of a book called Tomer Dvorah. Tomer Dvorah is one of the works of the Ramak, of Moshe Cordovero, one of the Kabbalistic teachers, and a very, very important, famous work. And he writes like this. And I'd like to teach a little paragraph of his words to try to understand. They're very, very deep, but we have to try to absorb them. And he says, when a person is studying Torah, he has to accustom himself. He has to try to have the proper intention in mind to rectify. We call it Tikkun Shechina, the divine presence, the Shechina, which is the divine presence, Knesset Yisrael, the vessel. Likashta el tiferet, to try to decorate the divine vessel with the tiferet, with the splendor. Now here I've explained what these things mean. He's referring to the middle sphere. We know that there are 10 Kabbalistic spheres, and the middle road, choosing not the right side, not the left side, but the middle road, we call that the tiferet, which is the midah of Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, was the Tiferet, was the truth. As it says, Titein emet Yaakov, give truth to Jacob. Jacob reflected the middle road. We know there was Abraham, who reflects the chesed, the love and kindness. Isaac, Yitzchak, reflects the din, the judgment. And Yaakov is the emet, the truth, the Tiferet, which is a combination of both sides. We can't live only on chesed, because if there's over amount of love and kindness, it leads to eventually to corruption. And din is judgment, is destructive. There's too much judgment. You need to have a way of channeling that energy into a nice combination of both, and which we call mercy, and that's the midat tiferet of Jacob. I'm going to go on with the words of Tomer Dvorah, and he goes on to say, he says, choosing, saying, ruling a law to the truth. What does that mean? That is what it means when you have an argument. L'shem shemayim, for the sake of heaven. We all know it's brought down in the ethics of our fathers that what is a machloket l'shem shemayim? What is an argument for the sake of heaven? That's an argument of Hillel and Shammai. Hillel and Shammai, the great Tanaic leaders. And what is an argument that is not L'shem Shammai, not for the sake of heaven? It's the argument of Korach and his congregation, Korach and his comrades that went along with him. So we see that Machloket L'shem Shamayim includes a combination combining both worlds of Chesed ve'emet, Chesed and judgment, and din, and bringing it to the truth, emet, combining both sides and looking for the middle road. As we all know, there's a concept, halacha concept, saying when there's an argument, halacha kidivrei hamachriya, the law is like that a person who takes the middle road. That's the middle road. That's what the Rambam Maimonides always says, a person should take the golden path, the middle road. And that is all connected to the Tiferet. Now we're going to continue in the words of the Tomer Dvorah. He says like this, להסכים הלכה עמו וכל מחלוקת שיצא מן השורה הזאת, because any argument that leaves the boundaries of trying to get to that middle road, that compromise, you could say the middle side, right? יצא מן השורה הזאת, ייבדל ממנו כי לא ירצה, כי לא ירצה. או לא ירצה התפארת להתאחז בו. He's saying any kind of argument that goes out of this pattern, this pattern of being in the middle road, being in the tiferet, ייבדל ממנו, you must separate yourself from that argument. Why? כי לא ירצה התפארת להתאחז בחוץ. Because the tiferet will not want to remain outside. That middle road does not want to remain outside. אפילו שיהיה בדברי תורה. Even if it's for like argument, now he goes on, he's talking generally now, right? He's talking an argument of Torah. Im hu lekanter, if it is just to be for the sake of argument. Sofa Gehenom. The end will be Gehenom, purgatory. Chas v'shalom, God forbid, ve'ein lecha machloket, shelo yivgom hatiferet, ela machloket haTorah, l'shem Shemai goes there. Because any kind of argument immediately could affect that important middle sphere, Kabbalistic sphere, which I said is the middle road. Any argument will do damage to that. Except one argument, if it's the sake of heaven. Shekol netivotei shalom, because the argument for Torah, for the sake of heaven, all its pathways are for peace. V'hava b'sofa, at the end there will be love. So he goes on. So this is, I think, there's a good place to stop this moment over here of his words. So what is Ramak saying over here? He's saying that there's a middle road. It is not too much of love and kindness, too much of judgment, but it's the middle road called mercy. That kind of middle road is called the tiferet, the attribute of Jacob. That will be damaged. God forbid if there's argument. There's argument. It means someone's pulling to one side, and they're not going for that middle road, the compromise, the combination. I would call it a mixture of both the chesed and the gvuah together. And only in the case when the argument's v'shem shamayim, then it will not, God forbid, damage the tiferet, but it will remain love at the end of the day. At the end of that argument, there'll be love coming out of that story. And that's also a great, of course, lesson in life. When you know an argument is really for the sake of heaven, you know that there is love at the end of the end of that argument, that someone is doing it for the sake of the truth, and not, God forbid, doing it for the wrong reasons. You know, there's the very powerful words of the Nodab Yehuda. He was one of the great, of Yecheskel Landau, one of the great rabbis of a couple hundred years ago. He lived in this 1600s, and he writes 16 or 1700s, I think, later on. But he writes like this. He says, and I'll just quote a very quick quote of his words. He writes, "V'nashi yishma ma'alato latzati." He goes, please. He's writing in his responsa in Yoredea. I'm not going to go there now. One of his halachic works about Yoredea. He wrote a lot of responses. A great rabbi, and he writes, please, sheishma ma'alato latzati. Listen to my advice. V'itein makom lishalom, and give place for peace. He writes. There's nothing worse than argument. In our time, he says, it is not a common thing that a machloket, an argument for the sake of heaven. And the devil's dancing around over there. He goes, please try to make peace. And those who make peace above, God who makes peace above will bring peace below. So basically, the Nodab Yehuda, this great rabbi, is saying that, you know, he's just trying to give an important ethical message to this other Talmudic scholar here, and he's saying to him, make sure that you don't argue, because argument, it's very hard in our time to have that proper intention of an argument for the sake of heaven. It's a very hard, it's a rare, not it's impossible, but it's a rare thing. Most of the time people are arguing because they want to show that they are right, and they'll go out of the way, even if they're wrong in the end, they'll continue the argument just to prove themselves that they're right. And here we see again the dangers of argument, and on the other hand, with looking for the proper mixture. Now, if we go back before we get to the portion, I want to quickly go to the beginning of the Torah, where the source of argument, well, the source of division, comes from, because everything comes from obviously a very, very, very inner place. And if we look in Genesis chapter 1, verse number 4, everyone open up their sources. And what does it say? Vayar Elokim, and God saw et ha'or, and the light. Kitov, that the light was good. Vayavdel Elohim ben ha'or ben ha'choshech, and God divided between the light and darkness. So what did God do? God sees that there's a difference between light and darkness, that light is good. So let me separate between the two things. And Rashi right away goes on to say, and I will read Rashi here. Rashi says on the verse, he says, Vayar Elokim et ha'or ki tov vayavdel, God saw light that was good and he separated. Rashi says, Af bazeh anu tzrichim lidevrei Agadah. He goes, we need here a Agadic interpretation. And he says, Ra'au she'eino kidai lishtamesh bo. Rishaim. God saw that the evil people in the world, they don't deserve this light. Vivdilo latzadikim latid lav. And he separated this light for the righteous, for the people in the future. And the reason Rashi is saying this is because we see later on that God is separating between the lights in heaven, the different heavenly lights. The sun and the moon later on day 4. So here on day 1, what is the separation of light? So Rashi is saying we need a Agadic interpretation to say this is really for the future, the special light, the divine abundance which will be blessed with the righteous will be blessed later on. And then Rashi goes on to say the simple understanding of the verse. And he says, L'fi pshuto kach parshel. Explain it like this. Ra'u ki tov ein na'elo v'lachoshech shiyu mishtamshim b'buvot. God saw that it wasn't in place for light and darkness to be working together, combined in the same entity. V'kava lezet chumo bayom v'lezet chumo b'layt. And therefore, he created the boundaries of light and the boundaries of darkness. God separating and made them in very distinct boundaries. It's a very, very important lesson here. And we'll get back to it in a moment. Because I want to quickly skip to the next day number 2 in creation. And in day number 2 of creation, what does it say? Vayom Elokim yihi rakia b'toch hamayim v'yimavdil ben mayim lamayim. God says, let there be a firmament between the water and divide between the waters. Vayas Elokim et harakia vayavdel ben hamayim asher metachal harakia ben hamayim asher me'al harakia v'yichein. God did this and he separated between the waters. Vayikra Elokim l'rakia shamayim. God called the firmament heavens, and Vayerev Vayivoke Yom Sheni. It was evening and morning the second day. Now here, right away, the famous question comes up. I'm going to bring down the Midrash. The Midrash brings a question. It's brought down, and of course, in source, in many commentaries, Rashi mentions it as well. It says, why doesn't it say, God saw that it was good on the second day? And Rabbi Meir Omer, Kashehi HaMachloket. Rabbi Meir says, because argument is such a terrible thing. Afilu machloket shi liyeshuvo shel olam. Even when this argument, or this division is a very difficult thing, even when the division for the sake of the world, of creation. Because it says God created the firmament and divided between the upper and the lower waters. And he says, therefore, it doesn't say God saw that was good because it was division. And therefore, he says we have to learn out. What it is that when there's an argument, not an argument, again, division for settling the world, it doesn't say good. Surely, God forbid, a division that will cause destruction of the world. It's a terrible, terrible thing, and obviously there's no good in something like that. Now, here, a question came to mind right away. Why does Midrash choose the second day of creation, where God divided between the firmament, the water above, the water below, to say, and there, because there doesn't really say good. It doesn't say the word God saw that it was good. But on the first day, it says God says that it was good, although he also divided. He divided between the darkness and the light. So the same question could have been, well, not the same question, but a question could be asked. It doesn't make sense what what the Midrash is teaching us. If he's saying that God didn't like division, that's why he doesn't say it's good. God saw that it was good on the second day. So why does he say it was good on the first day when God divided between the light and darkness? That's the question. And what comes to mind, I thought of an answer to this question, after it was bothering me. I said it's very simple, the answer. And what is the answer? The answer is that when it comes to the first day, light and darkness were two separate entities, clear entities that are different. As Rashi says, in these things, God saw he had to make boundaries between these two things because there is something that is very clear, the difference between light and darkness. On the other hand, with water is the same entity. When things that don't seem to have the necessity to be divided, water could live together. Why do they have to separate from one another? So there is the pain. With things that have that quality of really being unified as one entity, and they're forced to be pulled apart, that, of course, is a terrible thing. And that's why God didn't say good on the second day, because water could stay together. But why did God divide it? At the end of the day, it was for the sake of mankind, for the creation purposes. But still, it was something that could remain together. So pulling something that's unified away from one another is very, very hard. That's a painful thing, and that's why even when it's for the benefit, it's a painful thing for God. All the more so, God forbid, when something's pulled apart for no reason whatsoever, just for the sake of argument. And that, of course, is when we see so many homes are being destroyed, of husband and wife getting divorced, not getting along with one another, because of just petty arguments, and then eventually things that could really remain unified are being pulled away from one another. That's a very, very painful thing, and a very terrible thing what's going on in the world, which has to be rectified. So this concept that we see of division is brought way back in the beginning of creation, where it was hinting, the Torah is hinting right there the pains and the dangers of division. On the other hand, we also see the importance of division for mankind, that there are certain times we have to have that distinction between different sides and boundaries, eventually, which will bring about a unification, bring about a healthy balance in the world. So obviously it's a very, very, you can see the different sides here, but we have to be careful with it, because division can be an important thing, but it can also, of course, on the other hand, God forbid, lead to destruction and terrible things. So that's really, in the beginning of the Torah, hinted to us immediately, right away. And with this, I think we can now turn to the opening verses of the portion, where we see a terrible, terrible division going on. Now, what happens? It says, the Torah teaches us that this great individual, who was a very, very great individual, his name was Korach, right? Korach is a Levite, correct? He's the son of Yitzhak, the son of Levi, who was the son of Jacob. Of course, the Torah doesn't mention Jacob here, and we'll see why in a moment. Why wasn't Jacob mentioned here? And this is brought down in our sources because, and it's brought down, Rashi brings it down, why wasn't Jacob mentioned in the lineage, describing the lineage of Korach? Because he bikesh rachamim al atzmo, he requested mercy upon himself. Shelo yizacher shmo al machloktam, he didn't want his name to be mentioned when it comes to division and argument. Now, what is Jacob's quality? I mentioned before when we were talking about the Sfirot, is the middle road, is emet, the truth. And when he sees that from his lineage comes forth Korach, who goes against what Jacob stands for, that unification of the midot, of the attributes, and not holding your own and your own side and in fighting and anything, no matter what the cost is, just for the sake of argument. Jacob doesn't want to be mentioned there, and God did not place his name there. And that's a very important point to mention. Now, if we continue in the verse, we see, well, the verse itself requires a question, because Vayikach Korach took, and then it goes on to say who he was. What did he take? Right? That's the question that the commentaries immediately try to discuss. What did he take? And Rashi right away comes up and he says, Lakach et atzmo litzad echad. He took himself to one side, liot nichlak metoch ha'ida, in order to be separated from the congregation, to challenge the priesthood. And he brings down the Targum Onkelos, what he says, vitpalig nechlak meshar ha'ida. He wanted to hold on to argument. He wanted to hold on to this strife, to the division, And he brings a verse from Iyov, Mai kachali becha, your heart, what your heart is going to take. In other words, on a person, it could be as hard as pulling him in a different direction. He's not allowing himself to follow what everyone else is going. He's going in a different direction than everybody else. And so we see that the word to take here, which explained, means to separate himself. There's other explanations as well, but that's the explanation that first is brought down by Rashi. And we all know that obviously what he did was to go and war against Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, here if we look in further in the portion, we see that what was the claim of Korach? What was his claim? His claim is, Kulanu Kedoshim, we're all holy, right? So he had obviously some kind of question. He didn't understand what it is with the division of priesthood. Why the priesthoods? Why are they in this level of holiness? Why aren't we all holy? Correct. So it seems in a way he started out. You could easily ask a question: is nothing wrong with a child or anybody? A person could be a child, much older, does not understanding things. Someone who hasn't clarified questions, to ask people that know the answers, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying, something. Why? Are we all holy? What makes a priest on a higher level? But of course, there's two ways of asking. A person can ask, and as a rebellious act that he did, not only did that's why he took himself aside to argue against the leadership of Israel, or someone can ask a question, truly wanting to get to that answer, wanting the truth. What is the difference? Why is a Kohen different than why are we different than the Kohanim? We're all holy, and we all are holy. That's true. But obviously you have to know in what circumstances, what makes a Kohanim special. What is that special purpose that God gave in the world? We spoke about this in other lessons. So it was the way the question was asked and his actions that showed it wasn't really for anything but for an argument of strife, an argument for the sake of an argument, not to really try to reach the balance of that middle road we spoke about, but to pull himself away and to go astray from the rest of Israel. And that was the danger, the terrible thing. And we see that the Torah describes, this is really a fascinating description of the Torah, where it describes how Vatiftach ha'aretz et pia, the land opened up its mouth, Vativla otam, and it swallowed them up. Vet beitam, but it says vet batehem, their homes, vet kol adam asher lakoch, and anyone who was on his side on that, and all their properties. You can imagine it was like a vacuum cleaner that swallowed them all up. And they all went down. And here it is very, very interesting, and I should mention the Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in the chapter in the 6 of the Ethics of Our Fathers, which says that there were 10 things that were created on Erev Shabbat, the Ben Hashmashot, on Eve of Shabbat, right before the twilight, right before the Shabbat, the stars come out, as we say. So before Shabbat entered, there were 10 things that were created. And it's interesting that part of the things that were created, that I mentioned here, is this Pi Ha'aretz, the mouth of the earth, that opened up its mouth to swallow up Korah. It also mentions the mouth of the Be'er, Miriam, the spring of Miriam spring. It also mentions the mouth of the Aton, of the ass, of Biliam. And it goes on to list other things, but these three things, and I think it's fascinating, it refers to the mouth. What does the mouth refer to? This is very, very important. The concept, we know it's brought down in Proverbs, chapter 18, verse 21, Mavet v'chayim biyad halashon. Death and life are in the hands of the tongue, the mouth. As we all know, when God punishes, he only punishes measure for measure. Why was it that the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed up Korah? So here it's reflecting upon the mouth. What does the mouth have to do with anything? What is this mouth over here? What is the deep thing behind that? And I should mention, of course, that in our esoteric teachings, the mouth represents the malchut. That's the last of the 10 spheres, the mouth. What is the mouth? The mouth is the vessel. The mouth is the vessel that absorbs the abundance, the blessing. So when the vessels are problematic, and they're not absorbing things properly, that's where all the problems are going to come from. Because the God's abundance is something that's a given, it's always flowing down. But there must be the proper vessel to be able to grab a hold, to capture the abundance, the gift of Hashem, the forces of life, and that God wants to bestow upon us. So the Malchut is the mouth, any opening that, right? The mouth, or the earth, right? It reminds us the earth is also connects to the Malchut. So there's a lot of words that hint to the Malchut, the kingship, the sphere of kingship here. Now, what does this all have to do with what we're talking about now? I'd like to explain a little bit. Is first of all, the Talmud brings down in the Masechet Chulin, and it talks about Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, about their special quality. And I'd like to quote this. It quotes this particular Talmudic piece about Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron. And what the Talmud is teaching us is that they were on a level of extreme modesty, as we know. I mean, talking about modest people. The Torah says regarding Moshe Rabbeinu that there was no one more modest than Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? He was the most anav person in the world. But I'm going to read to you this Talmudic passage, and the Talmud says, "Amar Rava, v'iteim Rabbi Yochanan." Rabbi says, and some say Rabbi Yochanan, "Gadol shenemar b'Moshe v'Aaron yoter mima shenemar b'Avraham." It was said regarding Moses and Aaron is even greater than was said regarding Abraham. What does it say? De'ilu b'Avraham ketiv anochi afar ve'efer. Abraham, who's very modest, of course, one of the most modest people in the world, calls himself the dust, just dust of the earth, and ash. V'ilu Moshe v'Aaron, but Moshe Rabbeinu, they say, Nachnu ma, what are we? They call themselves nothing. V'amar Rav v'iteim Rabbi Yochanan. Again, they say, Ein olam mitkayem ela b'shvil Moshe v'Aaron. The world exists only for Moshe and Aaron. Why? Ketiv hacha v'nachnu ma. They say, what are we? Uketiv hatam tole eretz al blima. It says that God, tole eretz, God places the earth on nothing. Al blima. It's basically the forces of creation. Hashem created the world. God is holding, sustaining the world in its place. And in Hebrew, blima means without anything. So the ayin, the emptiness. God is literally holding this world together on emptiness, right? Blima, the ayin. Amar Rabbi Elai, what does Rabbi Elai say? Ein ha'olam mitkayem el b'shvil shemi shebolem et atzmo b'shat meriva. Rabbi Elai adds, the word blima also means to hold back, to sustain. When a person holds himself back from what? Because the world is being sustained by those, because the word blima also means to bolem, to stop. The people that put a seal on their mouths during an argument. Shenemar tole eretz al blima. So we see a very, very powerful teaching here that Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, these people with true modesty, the world is standing in their merit. And the world will continue to stand for those who just remain silent during argument. That we should not, God forbid, if it's an argument that is going to lead to, just for the sake of argument, to terrible things, person has to learn to remain silent in those situations. Only for the sake of heaven shall we open our mouths to really an argument for the Shem Shemaim, as we say. So we're going back to the Ben Hashmashot, that what is Ben Hashmashot? That God, these 10 things were created during that time. It was a twilight zone. It was a twilight zone between night and dark, right? Between the day ending and the night beginning. And that was like sort of a time where the boundaries are being compromised. Shifting from before and after. So that period of compromise, of shifting, is losing balance. It's like sort of a lack of balance, proper balance in that time. That's where the argument is very dangerous. And therefore, it's very fascinating. During that time is when God created already the mouth of the ground, the Malchut, that opened up. And swallowed up Korach. Why? Because the mouth is a boundary. We're able to close our mouths and we're able to open them. We should be opening our mouths when it's for important things. For speaking words of Torah, for speaking words of peace and love, but not, God forbid, for strife and argument. And therefore, that it's so connects to that twilight zone. When a person loses the boundaries, he doesn't know when to open his mouth or close his mouth. That's going to end up a person being swallowed up and going way down yonder. What happened to Korach? So this powerful message of what it is to be arguing for the sake of heaven. Well, really, right now we spoke what it is for those who come against, the leadership and for the sake of their own selves. But I'd like to clarify that before we end a little more. It's important to mention a couple more aspects regarding this. In this world, we spoke about many times. We spoke about the vessel, right? In this lesson, Malchut is the vessel. King David says about himself, "Libi chalal bekibi." My heart is a chalal, an empty vessel. When we become empty vessel, again, is a form of modesty. It's a form of nachnuma. What are we? When we realize that we are nothing. Just nothing. What is the word ani in Hebrew? The word ani we spoke about last week. It can mean tuma, uncleanliness. But if we take those same letters and we reverse them, we get ayin. We play around with the letters. It means the vacuum, the void, the ayin. Right? As we say, me ayin yavo, from the void will come my salvation, my help. God will, from the void, like God created the world, right? From that empty space. Now that void, when we make ourselves an empty vessel, then we will be told. What does an empty vessel mean? An empty vessel means that we are totally doing everything as much as we can in our power for the sake of heaven, to do good and justice, and only for no other purpose, just to make the creator of the universe smile. We are doing it for that purpose, the sake of what's right in this world, and not looking for personal interest for all kinds of things we do. That's a life's work to get to that level. But when an argument comes up for the purpose of a person's own ego, his own personal development, he wants to go forward. All the terrible things that happen in this world about people that always want to tread upon others because they want to stand up highest. So they're going to stand on the backs of others just to lift the head out of the crowd and try to say, oh, we're better than thou. And that is the dangers. The dangers are when people are totally caught up in themselves and that ego. And that's where the argument is going to come from. Moshe Rabbeinu were totally devoted to God. They had nothing, everything they did, that God chose Aaron, and later on we see how the portion describes how Aaron was chosen because of his special qualities that God gave for their purpose. And it was his staff that sprouted forth with flowers that God chose the kehunah, the priesthood. We have to understand it and respect the boundaries that God gave in the world. And when everyone respects those boundaries, and they are allowed, everyone's allowed to walk in their boundaries that God gave them, their purpose in this world, and we work together in unison, and we work together as one unit, everyone working together, then we're going to have the proper balance in the world, and the truth will come out of the world. As it says, the truth will come out of the ground. The ground, again, is the Malchut. That's where we want to see the truth come forth. When people are working and everyone's utilizing it, and everyone sees the good in others, and together we appreciate everyone's ability, their personal ability, and how they're working together for the benefit of everybody, and only for this V'Shem Shemayim, then we will see how the truth will sprout forth in the world. That is the rectification we are looking for. That will bring about, of course, Melech HaMashiach. Talking about when God willing, when the long wait that we've been waiting for our redemption will come place, it comes through this exact concept of working together and seeing it, the beauty that one has in the other. And I'd like to end with just a little bit of the words of the Kutei Moran of Nachman ben Breslov. We spoke about the Melech HaMashiach coming. And he writes, I'll just read a couple of his words. He says, Ume'ayin yotzot nafshot Yisrael. Where, he's saying the souls of Israel are coming forth, he says, Me'olam hadibur, from the world of speech. V'zeo nafshi yatsa bedabro. He quotes in Song of Songs, Nafshi yatsa, my soul came out when he spoke. Hainu shenafshot Yisrael yotzot me'olam hadibur. So we see here that our souls come out from the world of speech. Speech is the malchut, we said the peh. Vadibur b'chinat malchut. Exactly that. Speech is the malchut. כמו שאמר אליהו, מלכות פה. ובחינות שכינה גם הן, כי שוכנת איתם תמיד בלי הפסק רגע. He said also, Now the Shekhinah, he's talking about the divine presence, is always walking with us. God dwells us even when we're uncleanliness, even our uncleanness, God is with us. It's like the mother over their children, because the mother is always walking with the children, she doesn't forget them at all. It's the same thing with speech. Which is the divine presence, is always walking with us. As it's brought down in Jeremiah, when I speak about him, always remember him. It's like that mother. The mother refers to the Shekhinah as always remembering us. And that Shekhinah is walking with us. That's the speech, the holy speech that's walking with us. That is the true vessel. And he says, "V'zeu b'chinat galut ha-Shekhinah." And what does it mean when the Shekhinah is in exile? Shu b'chinat ha-Shekhinah begalut. When the Shekhinah is in exile, v'nit alem, it means it becomes totally someone who can't speak. Kemo shekatuv ne'elamti dumiyam, totally means silent. And in exile we are silent. We don't have that ability to speak. That's what happened to Paro. What does Paro basically do? Paro's whole thing was perach, using a soft mouth, right, to come against Israel with his mouth, but not to allow us the freedom of speech or anything. We couldn't allow ourselves to speak until God took us out of Egypt, and then we were relieved, and we received what? Pesach. Now the mouth can speak. We celebrated Passover. That's what Pesach is, Passover. The mouth can speak. We receive the dibrot, the speech from the Ten Commandments. So the malchut is hidden within our speech. When I'm trying to share the words of Rav Nachman, he's talking about here, what does it mean? What is all this going to bring about? The coming of our third temple being built, and the Messiah, the King of Messiah, and then the land. What does it mean, the King of Messiah? Spoke about that many times over. In our understanding, the Jewish understanding of Messiah is that we have to work our best to bring about the change and to build the malchut. We're not going to sit around and wait. Like people waiting out there in exile for Messiah to come. It's not going to come unless we make our effort to make it happen. To build the kingdom of Hashem in the land of Israel requires our rectification of acting upon everything we can to make changes that are going to make world changes in this world that are going to make things come closer and happen. And that, of course, comes from our mouth, what we speak when we talk words of holiness, kedusha, as we say. We speak Torah, and we respect one another, and we got to be very, very careful what comes out of our mouths, and not to argue, only for the sake. What is an argument for the sake of Shamayim? That is an argument with Hillel and Shammai. Is that even though they disagreed in the Masechet Yevamot, we're coming to a conclusion. Those who are learning Daf Yomi very soon in Masechet Yevamot will learn out that although they disagreed one another, and the disagreements they had in the Jewish law were very, very instrumental, because it can mean big differences of marriage and all kinds of things, but they still married with one another, which was fascinating. They continued to, when they came to that conclusion, the law is ruled in one direction, and we all come to that, we say the Tiferet, the middle road, an agreement, and showing love to one another. That's the Shem Shemayim. We have to unify ourselves, show love for one another, and this will bring about the redemption we've been praying so hard for. We must come together. This is a time to come together. Shabbat Shalom, B'sorot Tovot, Yeshuot V'Nechayim.